We're on the bottom of Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis Omar Avasi. The Gemara continues discussing the halachas of matzah, which matzah is fit for fulfilling the mitzvah. Omar Avasi Isa shel Ma'aser Sheni, the dough that you bake matzah from Ma'aser Sheni. The Divrei Rab Meir. So according to the opinion of Rab Meir, Petura min achala, it's potter of chala. And the Divrei Chachamim chayeves b'chala. According to the Chachamim, it's obligated in the mitzvah of chala. So Rashi here brings from the Gemara in Kedushin. The Gemara discusses Ma'aser Sheni, and we're talking over here about Ma'aser Sheni in Yerushalayim, which is the place that Ma'aser Sheni is eaten. So seemingly, if a person is allowed to eat the Ma'aser Sheni, he's in the right place. Why shouldn't he be allowed to use it for matzah? But the Gemara in Kedushin actually says that if a person uses food from Ma'aser Sheni to be mekadosh a woman with it, to make a kedushin, is that Ma'aser Sheni considered to be his? He's the owner, and therefore he could be mekadosh a isha with it? Or no? There's a mitzvah, it belongs to the Eibishter, and he has to eat it in Yerushalayim. And if he's mekadosh a woman with this money, it doesn't take effect. It's not really his. So this is the argument of Rab Meir and the Chachamim. So therefore the Gemara here says, Rav Asi said, that according to Rab Meir, that says that if you are mekadosh a isha with it, the kedushin does not take effect. The same thing is also with the mitzvah of chala. The mitzvah of challah does not apply to this dough that's Ma'aser Sheni, that's holy, that has to be eaten in Yerushalayim. It doesn't belong to you. According to the Chachamim, however, the kedushin does take effect. There's a mitzvah to eat it in Yerushalayim, but it belongs to you. So you chayiv on challah. Matzah shel Ma'aser Sheni, the same thing also. The matzah of Ma'aser Sheni in Yerushalayim. So the same thing. L'divrei Rab Meir, ein adam yotzi yedei chavasa b'Pesach. According to Rab Meir, it's not yours, so you're not yotzi the mitzvah of matzah. L'divrei Chachamim, according to the Chachamim that says it is yours, yotzi ba yedei chavasa b'Pesach. You'll be yotzi your mitzvah of matzah on Pesach. Esrig, the Gemara will discuss that. Esrig shel Ma'aser Sheni, same thing also with an esrig. That's from Ma'aser Sheni. L'divrei Rab Meir, according to Rab Meir's opinion, ein yotzi ba yedei chavasa. You're not yotzi because it's not yours. Ein yotzi ba yedei chavasa b'yamtiv. L'divrei Chachamim, according to the Chachamim, Adam yotzi ba yedei chavasa b'yamtiv. You will be yotzi yechiyev on yamtiv because it is yours. Maskefla Rav Papa. So Rav Papa asks the question. Bishloi me'isa. We understand these halachas when it comes to the dough for the mitzvah of challah. The chsiv arisay seichem. The pasuk says that it has to be your dough, mishalachem. Only if it's your dough are you chayiv in the mitzvah of challah. Esrig nami. What does it say by esrig? The chsiv ulakachtem lachem, that it has to be yours to be yotzer the mitzvah. Lachem mishalachem. Yehei, it should be yours. Ela matzah. However, regarding matzah, miksiv matzaschem. Does the Torah ever say that the matzah that you eat has to be yours? It says in the Torah, "Be'erev teichlu matzah is shivas yamim matzah is techelu." It never says matzaschem. Amarav v'teimer Rav Yirmiyah, Rav Yemer, Bashalmiyah, Asya lechem lechem. It doesn't say by matzah itself, but we learn a gzeira shava lechem lechem from what it says by matzah to what it says by the mitzvah of challah. Ksiv hacha, by matzah it says lechem aini. Ksiv hasam, and by the mitzvah of challah it says v'hoya ba'acholchem mi lechem ha'oretz. Mala alone, just like by the mitzvah of challah mishalachem, the dough has to be yours, and only then are you chayiv in the mitzvah of challah. Afkan, so too by the mitzvah of matzah mishalachem. The dough has to be yours to be obligated in the mitzvah of matzah. So from here, yes, we see from this Gemara, and this is the halacha, that the matzah that you're eating on Pesach has to be yours. So if you're giving matzah to someone else, you're giving it to him as a present, as a gift to use for the mitzvah of matzah, so he's yotzer the mitzvah of matzah. But you have to own the matzah in order to be yotzer. So the same thing also applies, as Alter Rebbe brings in a Shulchan Aruch in the end of Siman Tov Nun Daled. If a person takes matzah without permission, steals matzah, and eats the matzah, you're not yotzer the mitzvah. The Alter Rebbe there discusses there's a difference if you steal the matzah itself, or what happens if a person steals the flour and then he bakes matzah. So there's a shinui in the item that you steal. So then not necessarily are you obligated to give back the item itself that you stole. If you now baked it into matzah, now you just have to return money. So then the dough itself becomes yours and the matzah becomes yours. So you will be yotzer the mitzvah. Alter Rebbe there discusses many different scenarios of exactly in what case what you took without permission becomes yours or not yours. But it's the matzah has to be yours. It's interesting. There's Inyan b'negei to lulav, b'negei to dal minim. The Rebbeim were makbet to pay for it before Yom Tov. They were not makbet, I meant to say. They were not makbet to pay for it before Yom Tov, even though there is a Inyan of shalachem. So the same thing also b'negei to matzah. So not necessarily you have to pay for it before, but it has to be yours. There's a din of lachem that you learn out from challah. I'm telling manas lahachse, but the only thing is that you don't want it to be on manas lahachse. No chazara. You're eating it and that's it. Yeah. Sagt the Gemara weiter, Leime Messiah, shall we say we have a braise that will support what Rav Asi said. It says in the braise, Isa shal Maisa Sheni, a dough of Maisa Sheni, petura min achala. So it's exempt from the mitzvah of chala, divrei Rav Meir, according to Rav Meir's opinion. As I explained before, Rav Meir holds it's not yours, so you don't have the mitzvah of chala. Chachamim say you are chayev because it is yours. Says the Gemara, Leime Messiah. This braisa you're bringing here as a support to what Rav Asi said before. Hainu hach. This braisa says identical, the exact same thing of what Rav Asi said. Hachika Amar. So the Gemara says, no, this is what he meant to say when whoever it is that said Leime Misayele. Leime should we say midepligi beisa, just like we find clearly in a braisa that they have this argument regarding dough, whether you chayiv in the mitzvah of challah or not. So Bahanach nami pligi. So they argue also regarding matzah and the lulav and esrig, or maybe shani hasam dechsev arisei seichem trei zimni. There'd be a svara to say that maybe challah is different because the Torah writes arisei seichem twice, and therefore Rashi says if it writes it twice, so I could say that it comes to be memayit if it's sha'ul or gazel, if it's borrowed or stolen. So there's no lochem, it's not yours, and also a ma'aseh sheni, although you're allowed to eat it. Abisha gave it to you to eat, however, but since there's a kedusha to it, it's not fully yours, so it says a second time, I might even that. But by matzah and by lulav and esrig, where it only says the lashon lakachtam lachem once, and by matzah you have the gzeir shava to the challah, but it's only one lechem, one gzeir shava. Maybe I would say it only comes to exclude mamish, something that's stolen or borrowed. It's totally not yours. But ma'aseh sheni, although it's not fully yours, but you're allowed to eat it, so maybe there it shouldn't come to exclude it. So therefore he was asking Leimi Misayeh, do we see from this braisa what Rav Asi was mechadash or not? So now we understand what was really the chiddush of Rav Asi, that we do apply this level of lachem, even b'negeya to matzah and dalad minim, that has to be fully yours, and even if it's just ma'aseh sheni, which you're allowed to eat, you're not going to be yetzer the mitzvah. So continuing on this subject of ma'aseh sheni. So Rab Shimon ben Lakish asked the question, Mao sheyetze adam yidei chivasai bechala shal ma'aseh sheni v'Yerushalayim. Could you be yetze the mitzvah, not with the ma'aseh sheni itself, but with the chala of ma'aseh sheni when you're in Yerushalayim? Now the Gemara is going to explain why would there be a difference between the chala that you have to take off of the ma'aseh sheni. There would be more of a reason to be yetzer more than the ma'aseh sheni itself. And of course, we're talking about a kohen. The kohen that gets the challah, could he be yetzer with this challah of the ma'aseh sheni in Yerushalayim? So the Gemara explains. Aliva de Rabbi Yossi Glili, according to Rabbi Yossi Glili's opinion, loyti bayalach. There's no question that you're not going to be yetzer. Why not? Hashtu b'chulin loynafik. Rabbi Yossi Glili holds that with ma'aseh sheni itself, you're not yetzer. So b'chalasai mibaya. So for sure, with the challah of the ma'aseh sheni, for sure you're not going to be yetzer. We had before in the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi Glili learned out from lechem oini. It has to be something which you could eat ba'aninas, that a person could eat, even God forbid in a time when someone passed away. But so according to him, for sure you can't use this for matzah. But kiti bayalach, according to who is the question? Aliba de Rabbi Akiva. The question is according to Rabbi Akiva. What is Rabbi Akiva's opinion? B'chulin hu de nafik. Rabbi Akiva's opinion is that with the regular ma'aseh sheni, not with the challah of ma'aseh sheni, with the chulin of the ma'aseh sheni, you could be yetzer the mitzvah of matzah. What was the reason? So the Gemara before said this. We learned this yesterday. The reason is the I mitamu yeshlan hete b'moishavos. We had yesterday in the Gemara that there is a pasuk that it says b'chol moishvseichem, that you should eat the matzah b'chol moishvseichem. From this that it says b'chol moishvseichem, in all your dwellings, we learn out that you only yetzer the mitzvah of matzah with a dough, with a matzah that could be eaten anywhere in Eretz Yisrael or any of your dwellings. If you could only eat it in Yerushalayim, you're not yetzer the mitzvah of matzah. That was the source that you're not yetzer the mitzvah of bikurim, according to one opinion. Right, so the question is that this applies to ma'aseh sheni as well. However, the Gemara explained by ma'aseh sheni there is a scenario when you could eat the ma'aseh sheni outside Yerushalayim. How? If the ma'aseh sheni came into Yerushalayim, so then you can't redeem it anymore. You have to eat it there. But if it became tamei, so then you can redeem it and take it outside Yerushalayim. So according to Rabbi Akiva, when it comes to the Ma'aseh Sheni, if it becomes tamei, yeshlan heta b'meishavos. You can eat it anywhere, even outside Yerushalayim. So therefore, it's fit to be used for the mitzvah because it's b'chol meish v'seichem. However, the chala of Ma'aseh Sheni, di'im yatamye, if it becomes tamei, lesle heta b'meishavos. So what happens with the challah of Ma'aseh Sheni once it becomes tamei? You can't go and redeem it and eat it anywhere else. Challah that becomes tamei, which is like truma. Challah has the same halacha of truma. What do you do with truma that becomes tamei? Yeah, you have to burn it. You can use it maybe as fuel, but you can't eat it. So once it becomes tamei, you can't redeem it and take it outside Yerushalayim. Well, you have to burn it. So therefore, loy nafik. So you can't be yaitza with the challah of Ma'aseh Sheni because there's no scenario that you could eat it outside Yerushalayim. If it's not tamei, you could eat it only in Yerushalayim. Once it becomes tamei, you just have to burn it. So therefore, you can't be yaitza with this. It's not fit to be eaten b'chol mashviseichem. Or maybe I should say amrinon hoyel. I apply the concept of hoyel, which literally means since. What does this mean? Hoyel ve'ilu loy kara aleh Hashem. If this would not have been challah, if this would have been part of Ma'aseh Sheni, ve'i tami, and it would have become tami, islay heta b'meishavos, there would be a permission to go and take it out of Yerushalayim into other dwellings. V'nafik ba, you would be yaitze. Hashta nami, even now that it is challah, it doesn't matter. Nafik, you will be yaitze. I apply the concept of hoyel since. Since if it wouldn't have been challah, this would have been allowed. So even now that it is challah, it doesn't make a difference. So Rashi here explains what's the logic of applying this hayol over here. The logic is because if you separate the two, if you just take challah, if it would have been only challah a kohen could be yaitze the mitzvah with. The Mishnah said befedish a kohen could be yaitze the mitzvah of matzah with challah itself. If you would take only the fact that it's Ma'aseh Sheni for itself, you could also be yaitze with it according to Rabbi Akiva because it could be redeemed if it becomes tamei and take it out of Yerushalayim. So looking at each one separately, the fact that it's challah, the fact that it's Ma'aseh Sheni, it's roi for the mitzvah of matzah. Now here it happens to be Ma'aseh Sheni, which is challah, and therefore technically it comes out that there's no scenario that you can take it out of Yerushalayim. However, I separate the two, and I say, look at the fact that it's challah separately, look at the fact that it's Ma'aseh Sheni separately, and each one separately allows you to be yaitze the mitzvah of matzah with it. The fact that it happens to be both together doesn't change its status, and therefore I apply, this is the meaning really of what we're saying, that we apply this concept of hayol, treat the Ma'aseh Sheni aspect of it and the challah aspect of it separately, and each one separately is fit for the mitzvah, and therefore I could be yaitze. This is the question that Reb Shimon ben Lakish asked, according to one version. Others said that no, in this case he didn't have any question. In such a case I have no questions. The vadai amrinon hoyel, in this case I would say the concept of hoyel, that since if it wouldn't have been challah, Ma'aseh Sheni itself, I could be yaitze, and the challah for itself, I could be yaitze. So you could be yaitze with the matzah in this case. Kiti bayaloch, when do I have a question? Challah halakuach bekesef Ma'aseh Sheni. When you have challah, not from Ma'aseh Sheni itself, but challah that is from money of Ma'aseh Sheni. What happens usually with Ma'aseh Sheni? Most people they didn't schlep the produce of Ma'aseh Sheni to Eretz Yisrael, to Yerushalayim. They took, it's in Eretz Yisrael, but from wherever they are to Yerushalayim. They took that Ma'aseh Sheni and redeemed it, and then brought the money to Yerushalayim, and with that money bought food to eat it in Yerushalayim. So a person had the money of Ma'aseh Sheni, and he bought food, he bought a dough in Yerushalayim, and now he has challah that he separated from this money that was redeemed of Ma'aseh Sheni. So over here there's an added stringency. Why is there an added stringency b'negei to the money of the Ma'aseh Sheni? So the Gemara will explain that over here, even if it becomes tamei, according to one opinion, you can't redeem it and take it out of Yerushalayim. The Gemara will explain. So regarding this challah from the money that came from Ma'aseh Sheni. Now, according to the Rabbanan's opinion, there's no ibaya, there's no question about this case. Why? Because according to the Rabbanan, the money of Ma'aseh Sheni and the Ma'aseh Sheni itself has the same halacha. Kivin the Ama Yipoda. Rabbanan say, just like we said regarding Ma'aseh Sheni itself in Yerushalayim, if it becomes tamei, you could redeem it and take it out of Yerushalayim. The same is also true with money or with food that you bought from the money of Ma'aseh Sheni. If it became tamei, you can take it outside Yerushalayim. The same, there's no difference. So Hainu Ma'aseh, so it has the exact same halacha as Ma'aseh Sheni itself. But key to bayalach, according to whom will there be a question? Aliba de Rabbi Yehuda. According to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, the Amma, Rabbi Yehuda says you cover. Rabbi Yehuda says once the food that you bought from the money of Ma'aseh Sheni becomes tamei, you can't take it out of Yerushalayim. You can't redeem it and take it out of Yerushalayim. Ma'aseh Sheni itself, if it becomes tamei in Yerushalayim, you could redeem it and take it out of Yerushalayim. The money that you bought food, from the money of the Ma'aseh Sheni that you bought food with it, once it becomes tamei, you have to just bury it. You can't take it out of Yerushalayim. This is a very interesting thing because it comes out that the Ma'aseh Sheni itself has a leniency. You have the option if it becomes tamei to take it out of Yerushalayim. The money that comes from the Ma'aseh Sheni has the greater stringency that you can't take it out of Yerushalayim. Nitnan we learned in the Mishnah. Halakuach bekesef Ma'aseh Sheni. Something that is bought from the money of Ma'aseh Sheni, the food that's bought of the money of Ma'aseh Sheni, shenitma, that it became tamei. So the Tanakama, the Rabbanan say, yipada, redeem it just like the Ma'aseh Sheni itself and take it out of Yerushalayim, eat it wherever you want. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you cover. This food that was bought from the money of Ma'aseh Sheni cannot be redeemed like the money of like the Ma'aseh Sheni itself. So now here comes the question: if you have challah from this food of the money of the Ma'aseh Sheni, so mi amrinan, do I now apply and say hayil v'i loy lakuach hava? If you wouldn't have bought food from money of the Ma'aseh Sheni, but it would have been the Ma'aseh Sheni itself. If this would have been the Ma'aseh Sheni itself, so then the Ma'aseh Sheni itself you could take out of Yerushalayim. Now, what's the logic behind this? What's this hayil? Since if it would have been the Ma'aseh Sheni itself, but b'payil it's not the Ma'aseh Sheni itself. It's only the money of the Ma'aseh Sheni. So Rashi explains that when the Gemara says the hayil, just like before, the hayil has a logic behind it. Over here, the hayil has a logic behind it as well. And the logic is why taka is the halacha that the money of the Ma'aseh Sheni and then you buy food from it is more stringent than the Ma'aseh Sheni itself. It's really not a stringency. It's really a leniency. Because the Ma'aseh Sheni itself is a stronger status of Kedusha of Ma'aseh Sheni. So therefore, by Ma'aseh Sheni, if it becomes tamei in Yerushalayim, I could redeem it and take that Kedusha of the Ma'aseh Sheni that's very strong and transfer it over to something else. And then take that Ma'aseh Sheni out of Yerushalayim. The food that was bought from Ma'aseh Sheni has a less potent Kedusha. So when it becomes tamei, you don't have the option to now redeem it and transfer the kedusha to something else and take this food out of Yerushalayim because it doesn't have as powerful as a kedusha. That's why you can't transfer it to something else. So the point is, the reason why the food that was bought from the money of Ma'aseh Sheni has a stringency more than the Ma'aseh Sheni itself, it's really not a stringency. It's really showing that it's a lighter kedusha. It's a weakness of the kedusha, and therefore you can't transfer it to something else. But really, if it would be a real stringency, so then I would say, Ma'aseh Sheni maybe is fit for the mitzvah of matzah, because you can redeem it and take it out of Yerushalayim. But the money of Ma'aseh Sheni, or the food that you buy from the money of Ma'aseh Sheni, it's more stringent, there's a higher level of kedusha, so maybe that you can't be yaitz to the mitzvah of matzah. But it's really not a stringency. It's really a weakness of the kedusha. So therefore, maybe even though b'payil it has this weakness, so technically you can't take it out of Yerushalayim, but in essence, it shouldn't be any less than the Ma'aseh Sheni itself. So therefore I would apply this concept of hayil. That's the one hayil that we have to say over here. But then there's another hayil. You're talking about now the challah of this money, of this food that came from Ma'aseh Sheni, or from the money from Ma'aseh Sheni. So now there's another hayil you have to say over here. The hayil, v'loy kara aleh Hashem. If this wouldn't have been challah, v'itami, and it would become tamei, yeshli heta b'meishavis, I could take it outside Yerushalayim, v'nafik bey, you would be yaitze, so hashtanami nafik bey. So too now, even though it is challah, I would be yaitze. So the point is, there are two hayils that I have to apply over here. I have to say hayil to separate the challah from the fact that it's Ma'aseh Sheni, and I also have to say the first hayil that we just said, don't look at the fact that it's only the money of the Ma'aseh Sheni, treat it like the Ma'aseh Sheni itself. So I have to say two hayils. I use this logic only once, but trei hayil lo amrinan. To say this twice, I don't say twice hayil. The fact is that now it's only the food from the money of Ma'aseh Sheni, and it's also challah. So therefore, it's too far removed from the original scenario where you could take it out of Yerushalayim, and therefore you're not going to be yetz to the mitzvah of matzah with it. Rave says Rave, mistavre, it's logical to say that you actually do apply two hayils in this case. Shem meiser chadu. It's all meiser. In all these cases, it is meiser sheni, and Rabbi Akiva's opinion is that meiser sheni in Yerushalayim is fit for the mitzvah of matzah because if it becomes tummy, it could be taken out of Yerushalayim. That rule, that logic of Ma'aseh Sheni itself applies even to the money that was bought from the money that you bought food from Ma'aseh Sheni, and even to the challah, because in essence, it's really all Ma'aseh Sheni itself. So you yaitz the mitzvah of matzah with it. This Gemara here that says this unique concept that you have the money of Ma'aseh Sheni that's more stringent than the Ma'aseh Sheni itself. So I explained what Rashi here says, that logically it's not really a stringency. It shows on a light on the kedusha of the money being less. But when the Rambam quotes the Sinyan, he does actually say that this is a unique example where you find that a tafel is chomer min ha'ikar. That's something that's only secondary, it's only bought from the Ma'aseh Sheni, but nevertheless it's more stringent than the Ikar itself. So this is a unique thing. And there's a Arichas de Gesicha from the Rebbe in Chelik Lamed Daled in Parshas Re'eh, where the Rebbe there says that the whole Chiddush of Ma'aseh Sheni is the fact that a Yid on his own could take Ma'aseh Sheni and transfer that Kedusha to something else. Meaning the whole chiddush of the kedusha of Ma'aseh Sheni is unlike other inyanim of kedusha that comes mulmaila, that something becomes kaddish. Over here, it's not only the Ma'aser itself that's kaddish, but a yid has the ability to transfer the Ma'aseh Sheni to something else. So dafka in Ma'aseh Sheni, you see the maila of the koyach of a yid below, how he could bring about a kedusha of Ma'aseh Sheni into something else. So therefore, dafka in this mitzvah of Ma'aseh Sheni, you see expressed this concept that the tafel is chomer min ha'ikar, meaning us here below, which are tafel, legabi the greatness of the Eibishter, that there's a greater kedusha, greater stringency that there is in the money of Ma'aseh Sheni that a yid creates on it to own its kedusha more than the Ma'aseh Sheni itself, which is the kedusha that comes min hashamayim. That's the chiddush of this case.
We had tafel here?
Huh?
So we had
Legabi the Eibishter worked tafel, correct?
Yeah?
We have the koyach to transfer the kedusha, and the chiddush is that when a yid transfers the kedusha, it becomes even more stringent than the makar l'mayla, than the original kedusha that it had in the Ma'aseh Sheni itself, and you can't redeem it if it becomes tamei. The Gemara goes back to the Mishnah. Chalas, toider, kiki, nozeh. So what did it say in the Mishnah? If you have the chalas that are prepared for carbon toider, or the kikin that are prepared for the nozeh, if you prepare it for yourself, so then you can't use it for matzah. If it's prepared for someone else, or you prepare it to sell it for someone else, you could use it. So first the Gemara is going to explain b'chlal this concept. Why can't you use it for matzah if you prepared it for a carbon? And then it'll explain the distinction if you prepared it for yourself or someone else. Minan and Mili. So from where do we know this? Omar Rabbe, the Omar Kra, because the pasuk says, "Ushmartem es hamatzos." You have to guard your matzahs. What does this mean? Matzah mishtameres l'shem matzah. You have to guard the matzahs that it shouldn't become chametz, but it has to be l'shem the mitzvah of matzah itself. Yotzes ezu she'em mishtameres l'shem matzah l'shem zevach. But over here, you're guarding the matzah that it shouldn't become chametz, not for the purpose of the mitzvah of matzah, but for the purpose of the carbon, of the taida or the nazir. So this is a very important thing. The mitzvah of Shmartem es hamatzos is not only to guard it, that it shouldn't become chametz. That's the simple thing, that it shouldn't become chametzdik. But also, as it's done when you bake matzah, you have to have the kavanah of the shmira of the matzah to bake the matzah l'shem mitzvahs matzah, not for any other purpose. That's an additional mitzvah, specifically l'shem matzah. Rav Yosef says, Makra, the source is from somewhere else. The pasuk says, Shivas yamim matzahs techelu. When it talks about the mitzvah of matzah, it talks also about eating the matzah for 7 days. So what we say is, matzah nachelas l'shivas yamim, a matzah that is fit to be eaten for all 7 days of Pesach. You could be yaitze the mitzvah the first night for the mitzvah of matzah. Yatzah zezu she'ein nachelas l'shivas yamim ela l'yayim v'layla. Whereas over here, a person is making this matzah with the intention that it should be used for the carbon that could only be eaten for 1 day and 1 night, both the taida and the nazir. It could only be eaten 1 day and 1 night, so you can't eat it all 7 days, so you're not going to be yaitze. So Rashi says, the Gemara here is saying a big chiddush. Even though he's only preparing it for the carbon, it might not even end up being used for the carbon, and then it will be able to be eaten for all 7 days. But the very fact that you're preparing it with this kavanah, that it should be eaten only for a day and a night and not for all 7 days, it doesn't fit into the category of shivas yamim matzahs techelu. It wasn't prepared to be possible to be eaten for 7 days, and therefore you're not going to be yaitza. Tanya kvasei de Rabbe, v'Tanya kvasei de Rav Yosef. In one brayse it says Rabbe's reason, and in another brayse it says Rav Yosef's reason. Tanya kvasei de Rabbe, in one brayse it clearly says, Yochel yaitza adam yidei chavasi b'chalas taida rikike nazir. I would think you can use the matzah prepared for the carbon taida or nazir. Talmud leima shmartem es hamatzah, matzah mishtameres l'shem matzah. Only the matzah that's was guarded not to become chametz for the purpose of the mitzvah of matzah. Yatsa zusha eina mishtameres l'shem matzah. It wasn't being guarded for the mitzvah of matzah. Ela l'shom zebach, only for the carbon. Tayik v'seder Rav Yosef, and another brayse clearly says the reason of Rav Yosef. Yachol yatsa adam yidei chavasai b'chalas teide rekike naser. You would be yatsa with the karbanis, the matzah for the karbanis. Talmud loima shivas yamim matzah stichelu matzah nechelas shivas yamim. Only the matzah that could be eaten, that's being prepared to be eaten for 7 days. Yatsa sezu she'ein nechelas shiva elo l'yayim v'layla, which excludes these matzahs prepared for the karbanis that could only be eaten for 1 day and a night. Those are the two sources that we clearly see in the Braisa. So now the Gemara asks, why do we need these new sources? Why don't we go back to what we already had before? V'teipik, why not learn it out milechem oini? From what it says in the pasuk, lechem oini. What do we learn out from lechem oini? That mi shenechal be'aninus. You only yaitze with a dough, with matzah, that could be eaten even when a person is an oinon. Yatzazeh, she'ein nechal ba'aninus, which excludes the kachim. The oinon is not allowed to eat kachim. Ela b'simcha, only in a state of simcha. So why do we need new psukim, just like the pasuk we brought before by Maisa Sheni, so we can use the same pasuk also for kachim as well. Says the Gemara, Savala Rabbi Akiva. So we'll have to say that these braises here are following Rabbi Akiva's opinion. The Omar Oniksiv. The Torah doesn't say Oini, that you darshan Oini with an aleph. It says Oni. We darshan from that it has to be Lechem Oni, but not Lechem Oini. The Teipik Lei asks the Gemara, but why can't we say that we should understand that you can't use the matzah prepared for the karbanis for a different reason? Tahavalei matzah shira, because the ingredients used in this matzah makes it wealthy matzah. It's not the regular matzah, which is only water and flour. How do you prepare the matzah for the karbanis? There's also oil that's mixed into it. We said before, if you need the matzah with wine, oil, or honey, that's what's called matzah shira. So how could it be yaitz the mitzvah with matzah shira? Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. So Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak says, no, the amount of oil that's placed into this ingredient, the ingredients of this matzah or challah, the lechem that's made for the taida, is very little. Reviyasi, there's only one reviyas, there's a quarter of a lug of oil, umischalekasi lekama chalas, and that quarter of lug of oil is for many chalas, for a very large amount of chalas. Rashi brings the cheshbon, really there was a half a lug, but that half a lug had to be split into half, which is a quarter, and then they used it for the chalas that they made. And Rashi says the chalas were made from a very large amount of flour. Sheva esreinis pachas shlish, a very large amount of flour, and there was very, very little oil that was used for a lot of flour. So therefore, it doesn't become matzah shira with so little oil. Frek the Gemara, but let's go back to something else that we said before. Why don't we use what we said before, that you only yaitze the mitzvah of matzah with something that can be eaten in all your dwellings? And over here we're talking about what's prepared for the carbon taida or nazir. It could only be eaten. It's kachim kalam. It could only be eaten in Yerushalayim. You can't eat it anywhere outside Yerushalayim. Amar Reish Lakish, says Reish Lakish, Zaysay Meres. The fact that these braises did not use that source, this teaches us chalas teider kike nazer nechalen b'noive givain, that they were able to bring a carbon taida with the chalas and the kike nazer even when the mishkan was in noiv and givain. So there's a big discussion and a big argument about this. Rashi here brings that the mishkan in noiv and givain had a status of a bama gedola. It was like a big mizbeach. It didn't have the regular status of a Beis HaMikdash, and not all karbanis could be brought there. According to some opinions, Rab Shimon Rashi brings, some opinions say you could only bring there the regular karbanis tzibur, like a carbon tamid every day, the carbon on Shabbos and Yontif. Only certain karbanis could be brought there, but not other karbanis that don't have a specific time when it's brought. According to other opinions, only a carbon oila and shlomim, but not other karbanas, not a carbon mincha can't be brought over there. The lachmei toida not brought over there. There's all kinds of limitations regarding noiv and givain. Noiv and givain is interesting because Rashi, it's a whole big arichas here in Rashi. You had the Mishkan Shiloi that was basically the same Mishkan that you had in the Midbar. And the noiv and givain was already built a bayis shalavanim. It was built a regular structure with stones. Elamai didn't have a regular roof on it. So there's a big machlokes about the status of the Mishkan and noiv and givain. So from these braises, we see over here that in Noiv and Givain, which is outside Yerushalayim, they were allowed to bring the carbon taida with the chalis taida, with the carbon nazir, and the rikikin of the nazir. And then, in that time period, before the Yidden came to Yerushalayim, they were allowed to eat the chalis and taida all over Eretz Yisrael. True, after they came to the Beis HaMikdash, and then the Korban Todah and the Chalas Todah could only be eaten in Yerushalayim, but in that time period it could be eaten everywhere. So therefore it's B'chol Mish V'Seichem. Tanya Rabbi Loi, Sha'altis Rabbi Eliezer. I asked Rabbi Eliezer the question, Ma'o she'yetz adam b'chalas Todah rekikei nozer. Could a person be yetzer the mitzvah of matzah with the chalas of a Todah or the rekikei nozer, which is the halacha that the Mishnah spoke about? Amar li, and Rabbi Eliezer answered me, Loi shamaiti. I don't know, I didn't hear what the halacha is. Basi v'shalti lifnei Rabbi Yeshua, I came to ask Rabbi Yeshua, Amali, and he told me, Harei Amru, we have the Mishnah that said, Chalis Todah rekikei nozer, she'asan la'atzmai, if you prepare this for yourself, ein adam yetzer ben yedei behen, you're not yetzer with this, limka b'shuk, if you prepared it to sell to others, to be used for the Korban Todah, yetzer ben, for that you are yetzer. So now I came back to Rabbi Eliezer and I told him what Rabbi Yeshua told me. Amali, Rabbi Eliezer answered me, bris, in the covenant. He made like a shvuah in the covenant that yes, this is true. He's repeating you what he heard, tradition given down from Moshe B'Sinai. This is true. In other words, this halacha that we make this distinction, whether you prepared it for yourself or you prepared it to sell for someone else. Others said, no, he didn't say it as a statement. He was wondering. He said, B'ris, should I swear that this is true? This is, what is this, some kind of a tradition that's given from Moshe Sinai? Why are we making this distinction? Don't you need any reason to explain what difference should it make if you prepared it for yourself or you prepare it for someone else? We brought before the reasons why a person is not yetzer, because it was prepared for a carbon or because it can't be eaten for 7 days. So what difference does it make if you prepared it for yourself or if you prepared it for someone else? It's being prepared for a carbon. So now the Gemara explains, so what's taka the reason to make this distinction? Amar Rabbe, says Rabbe, kol l'shok, anytime you're preparing it to be sold for someone else for a carbon, imluchi mimlach, the person is actually making up his mind that it's with a condition. Amar, he says to himself, im misdaven, it'll be sold, so then it'll be for the carbon. But ilay misdaven, if it won't be sold, then epik b'huana, then I'll just take it for myself and use it for the mitzvah of matzah. So he's making that condition originally, so therefore it is going to be fit for the mitzvah of matzah.